The wind howled like a hungry wolf, whipping snowflakes against the small wooden cabin. It was the winter of 1888 in Alaska, and the cold was a living entity, freezing bones and hopes. Elias, a boy of only 12, could barely sleep. Every creak of the wood and groan of the wind kept him alert. He was used to the solitude and the harshness of that place. His parents, immigrants seeking a better life, had succumbed to gold fever and later to disease, leaving him to the mercy of a distant uncle, Jasper, a man of few words and many mysteries who lived in a remote mine. That particular night, Elias's sleep was interrupted not by the wind, but by a faint, desperate sound that seemed to come from outside. Curious and driven by a childlike intuition, he got up, put on his heaviest coat, and carefully opened the door, facing the fury of winter. Snow covered everything, transforming the landscape into a white, unforgiving sea. In the faint light of the aurora borealis dancing in the sky, Elias discerned a dark, motionless shape a few dozen meters from the cabin. His heart pounded. As he approached, the silhouette took shape. It was a girl, perhaps a little younger than him, collapsed in the snow. Her rags barely protected her from the glacial cold, and metal chains bound her wrists and ankles to a heavy log. Elias's jaw dropped. He had never seen anything so cruel and inhuman in his short life. She was unconscious, and her pale, bruised face betrayed how long she had been there. Elias felt a pang in his chest, a mix of fear and anger. No one deserved such a fate. He needed to act, and fast. The only person Elias trusted, the only man he knew who could help, was Jasper. Jasper was known for his strength, his integrity, and though rough, for his unshakable sense of justice. But Jasper lived in a cabin a long and dangerous journey away, across treacherous, snow-covered terrain. The decision was instantaneous. Elias didn't hesitate. He knew time was his enemy. Without thinking of the consequences for himself, only of the girl's life, he turned and began to run all night. If you're enjoying the story and want to follow Elias's journey to find out what happens to the girl, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters. The first hours of Elias's run were fueled by a surge of adrenaline and a fierce determination. The air was a biting frost, stinging his exposed skin. Each breath was a sharp pain in his lungs, and the deep snow swallowed his boots, making every step an arduous struggle. The landscape was a blur of white and shadow under the indifferent gaze of the stars. He navigated by instinct, following the faint, almost imperceptible trail he knew led to Jasper's isolated claim. The weight of the girl's plight pressed heavily on his young shoulders, pushing him forward when his legs screamed for rest. As the night deepened, a fierce blizzard began to whip up. The wind intensified, tearing at his clothes and making visibility almost zero. Snow swirled around him, disorienting and blinding. Elias stumbled, fell, and picked himself up countless times, his small hands raw from the cold. He remembered Jasper's lessons about surviving the Alaskan wilderness. Keep moving, conserve energy, trust your instincts. He pulled his parka tighter, trying to shield his face from the ice particles that felt like tiny needles. Fear, cold, and exhaustion began to gnaw at his resolve. He thought of the girl, helpless in the snow, and that image rekindled a spark within him. He couldn't stop. He wouldn't. The journey stretched on, an agonizing test of endurance. His muscles ached, his feet were numb, and the cold was seeping into his very bones. The silence of the vast wilderness, broken only by the shriek of the wind, was both isolating and terrifying. He imagined the worst, picturing the girl succumbing to the elements, and that grim image spurred him to push harder. He knew he was taking a grave risk, venturing out alone in such conditions, but the alternative was unthinkable. The hope that Jasper would be able to help, that he would understand the urgency, was the only thing keeping him from collapsing. The first faint hint of dawn was still hours away, yet Elias felt an almost unbearable fatigue. He imagined Jasper's stern but kind face, his strong hands, and his unwavering sense of what was right. That vision became a beacon in the storm. He knew Jasper wouldn't turn his back on someone in need, especially not a child. This knowledge, coupled with the dire image of the girl chained and freezing, propelled Elias onward, one painful step after another, through the relentless Alaskan night. He was a small figure against a vast, indifferent wilderness, but his resolve burned bright. The first weak rays of dawn finally pierced the dense clouds, casting a pale, cold light over the snow-covered landscape. Elias, utterly spent, stumbled forward, his legs burning, his lungs raw. He had been running for what felt like an eternity, his mind a blur of fatigue and desperation. Just as despair threatened to consume him, a faint wisp of smoke caught his eye, rising from beyond a cluster of snow-laden pines. Jasper's cabin. Relief, sharp and sudden, washed over him, almost bringing him to his knees. He pushed through the last few meters, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. The cabin, small and sturdy, stood as a lonely sentinel against the vast, unforgiving wilderness. Smoke curled lazily from its chimney, a welcoming sign of life in the desolate expanse. Elias practically collapsed against the heavy wooden door, his frozen knuckles rapping weakly against it. He waited, shivering uncontrollably, for what felt like an eternity. Finally, the latch clicked and the door creaked open, revealing the imposing figure of Jasper. Jasper was a man forged by the Alaskan wilderness, tall, broad-shouldered, with a grizzled beard and eyes that had seen too much. His face, usually set in a grim expression, softened momentarily at the sight of his nephew, disheveled and covered in snow. "Elias! What in tarnation?" His voice, deep and gravelly, was laced with concern. Elias, barely able to speak, gasped out the words, his voice hoarse and broken. "Jasper, you have to help. There's a girl, chained, in the snow." The gravity of Elias's words cut through Jasper's initial shock. His eyes, usually guarded, widened with a sudden fierce intensity. He saw the desperation in the boy's gaze, the raw fear and exhaustion. Without another word, Jasper's expression hardened into a grim resolve. He knew Elias wouldn't have made such a perilous journey unless it was a matter of life and death. He pulled the boy inside, his mind already racing, processing the implications of Elias's fragmented message. The warmth of the cabin, though faint, felt like a blessing after the brutal night. Jasper moved with the efficiency of a man accustomed to crisis. He quickly stripped Elias of his frozen outerwear, wrapped him in thick furs near the roaring stove, and pressed a mug of hot, sweetened tea into his trembling hands. "Drink this, boy. Then tell me everything." Elias, fueled by the warmth and Jasper's calm, authoritative presence, recounted the horrifying scene, the chained girl, her unconscious form, the desolate snow. He spoke with a child's raw honesty, his voice shaking with renewed emotion as he described the injustice. Jasper listened intently, his expression growing darker with each detail, his brow furrowed, and a muscle twitched in his jaw. The idea of someone chaining a child in the Alaskan wilderness was an act of cruelty that defied comprehension. He was a man who lived by a strict code of justice, and this violated every fiber of his being. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, now burned with a quiet fury. "Chained, you say? Who in God's name would do such a thing?" he muttered, more to himself than to Elias. Without a moment's hesitation, Jasper began to arm himself. He donned his heavy winter gear, checked the loads in his sturdy rifle, and strapped a hunting knife to his belt. He prepared a small pack with a blanket, some basic first aid supplies, and a flask of hot water. "You stay here, Elias. Get warm. I'm going back with you, but I need you rested enough to point me to her. Can you do that?" Elias, though still trembling, nodded fiercely. "Yes, Jasper, I can." The bond between them, usually unspoken, solidified in that moment. Jasper recognized the immense courage Elias had shown, undertaking such a perilous journey alone. He knew the boy wouldn't exaggerate, wouldn't lie about something so serious. The urgency in Elias's voice, the raw terror in his eyes, had conveyed the grim reality. Jasper's determination was unyielding. He would find that girl, and he would confront whoever was responsible for such a heinous act. The Alaskan wilderness was a brutal place, but even here, some lines were not to be crossed. If you're gripped by the unfolding drama and want to see if Jasper can save the girl, subscribe to the channel and join our community for the rest of this compelling story. With Elias bundled securely on the back of his sturdy sled, pulled by his two experienced sled dogs, Jasper set off. The blizzard had lessened, but the wind was still sharp, and the snow was deep, making progress slow and arduous. Jasper, a man of few words, focused intensely on the trail, his keen eyes scanning the drifts for any sign of a path, relying on Elias's memory and the faint landmarks the boy could recall. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic crunch of the sled runners on the snow and the panting of the dogs. Elias, though exhausted, felt a renewed surge of hope. With Jasper at the helm, there was a real chance. He pointed out the slight rise in the terrain, the cluster of particularly gnarled spruces, the distant shape of a specific rock formation. Jasper nodded, absorbing each detail, his face grim but determined. The cold was still pervasive, a constant, gnawing presence, but the urgent mission outweighed the physical discomfort. Jasper's large, gloved hand occasionally brushed Elias's back, a silent reassurance that spoke volumes. As they drew closer to Elias's cabin, a sense of dread began to creep in. The conditions were still brutal. Had they made it in time? The girl, unconscious and exposed, wouldn't have lasted much longer in this unforgiving cold. Jasper pushed the dogs harder, their powerful bodies straining against the harnesses. The air was thick with the scent of pine and frozen earth, mingled with the metallic tang of fear that clung to Elias. He squinted ahead, desperate to see the cabin, desperate to see any sign of the girl. The final stretch felt interminable. Elias felt a knot tightening in his stomach, a mixture of hope and agonizing suspense. He pointed to the exact spot where he had found her. "There, Jasper, over there." Jasper urged the dogs forward, and as they rounded a small thicket of trees, the cabin came into view. His heart pounded in his chest, a heavy drumbeat of anticipation and dread. The moment of truth was upon them. Jasper brought the sled to a halt, his eyes scanning the area around Elias's cabin. His gaze immediately locked onto the dark shape in the snow, just as Elias had described. The girl was still there, a small, still bundle against the vast white expanse. A wave of anger tightened Jasper's jaw. He leaped from the sled, his movements quick despite his heavy clothing. Elias scrambled off as well, his eyes fixed on the motionless figure. As they approached, the full horror of the situation became clear. The girl's skin was blue-tinged, her breathing shallow and ragged. Her eyes were closed, her face a mask of suffering. The chains, heavy and cruelly applied, bit into her frozen skin. Jasper knelt beside her, his large hands working with surprising gentleness to examine her. He felt for a pulse, a faint flicker against his fingers. She was alive, but barely. "We need to get her inside, Elias," Jasper stated, his voice low and urgent. He quickly assessed the crude lock on the chains. With a practiced motion, he produced a small, sturdy lock-picking tool from his pocket, a testament to his resourceful nature, and worked quickly. A soft click echoed in the stillness as the first chain gave way, then the second. The girl's frail body slumped slightly as the tension released. Jasper carefully lifted her, his powerful arms cradling her as if she were made of glass. Her weight was almost nothing. He carried her into the cabin, Elias rushing ahead to open the door. Inside, the meager fire still glowed faintly in the hearth. Jasper laid her gently on the cot, immediately beginning to rub warmth back into her limbs, carefully removing her frozen rags and wrapping her in thick, soft furs. Elias watched, a silent witness, his young mind reeling from the stark reality of what they had found. The questions of who would do this and why began to loom large in their minds, pushing aside the immediate relief of having found her alive. The cabin filled with the soft sounds of Jasper's movements as he worked tirelessly over the girl. He gently warmed water on the stove, using it to slowly thaw her frostbitten skin, murmuring low words of encouragement. Elias, meanwhile, stoked the fire, adding logs to increase the warmth in the small space. They worked in tandem, a silent pact to save this fragile life. After what felt like an agonizing eternity, the girl stirred, a faint moan escaping her lips. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of the clear Alaskan sky, clouded with pain and confusion. She looked at Elias, then at Jasper, her gaze wide with fear and disorientation. Jasper offered her a small spoon of warm, diluted broth, coaxing her to swallow. Slowly, agonizingly, she began to respond, her breathing becoming less shallow, a flicker of awareness returning to her eyes. She was still too weak to speak, but the fact that she was conscious even for a moment was a monumental victory. Elias felt a wave of relief wash over him, followed by a surge of renewed anger at the cruelty she had endured. Jasper continued his ministrations, his focus absolute. He carefully tended to her raw wrists and ankles, applying salve to the chafed skin where the chains had bitten deep. The girl flinched, but she didn't cry out, showing a stoic resilience that belied her young age. As the warmth gradually seeped into her body, a tiny bit of color returned to her lips. She was still in grave danger, weak and traumatized, but the immediate threat to her life had lessened. The questions, however, began to press in on them. Who was this girl? Where did she come from? And why had she been left chained in the snow to die? Jasper's gaze, usually unreadable, now held a deep, simmering anger. This act of barbarity was not something he could ignore, not in his wilderness. He knew that once the girl was stable, they would have to uncover the truth. The Alaskan wilderness was a vast and unforgiving place, but injustice, especially against a child, rarely went unpunished if Jasper had anything to say about it. This story of resilience and human connection is far from over. To see how this harrowing tale unfolds and if justice will prevail, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell for future updates. For the next few days, Jasper and Elias dedicated themselves to the girl's recovery. Jasper, with his knowledge of herbs and wilderness medicine, concocted warming teas and poultices for her wounds. Elias, for his part, kept the fire burning, brought fresh snow for water, and spoke to her in soft, reassuring tones, trying to coax her back to health. Slowly, painfully, she began to regain her strength. Her fear, though still present in her eyes, gradually lessened as she saw the genuine care in their actions. One afternoon, as Jasper was changing her bandages, she whispered a word, her voice thin and reedy. "Lillian." It was barely audible, but Elias, sitting nearby, heard it. He looked at Jasper, who nodded gravely. "Lillian," he repeated, a name finally giving form to the fragile life they had saved. Lillian was still too weak for extended conversation, but the simple act of speaking her name, of giving her an identity, felt like a significant step forward. Jasper tried to glean more information, asking gentle questions about who had done this to her or where she came from. Lillian would shiver, her eyes darting nervously, but she remained silent on those points. The trauma was still too fresh, the fear too deeply ingrained. Jasper understood. He knew that pushing her would only make things worse. They had to earn her trust, to make her feel safe, before she could truly open up. The routine of caring for Lillian brought a new rhythm to the cabin. Elias felt a profound sense of responsibility for her, a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed. Jasper, though stoic, showed a paternal tenderness he rarely displayed. The shared ordeal had forged a silent bond between the three of them, a makeshift family against the harsh backdrop of the Alaskan winter. But the lingering questions about Lillian's past and the monstrous act committed against her remained a heavy shadow over their nascent peace. As Lillian slowly recovered, gaining a bit more strength each day, a quiet resolve settled over Jasper. He began making discreet inquiries among the few trappers and prospectors who occasionally passed through the remote area. He spoke in vague terms, asking about any new faces, any strange occurrences, any signs of unusual activity. The Alaskan wilderness, though vast, was also a place where news, however distorted, eventually traveled. His efforts were met with little success at first. The few souls he encountered were either reticent, wary of getting involved, or genuinely knew nothing. The weather remained bitterly cold, limiting travel and communication. Elias watched Jasper's frustration grow, his own impatience mirroring his uncle's. He longed for answers, for justice for Lillian. He often sat by Lillian's side, drawing crude pictures in the dirt of the cabin floor, trying to distract her from her lingering fear. One frigid evening, a grizzled old trapper, known only as Old Man Fitz, stumbled into Jasper's cabin, seeking shelter from a sudden squall. Over a shared meal and a warming fire, Fitz recounted a strange tale he'd heard from a group of less than reputable prospectors further south. They spoke of a rough, isolated camp, a man with a cruel streak, and a young girl who had mysteriously vanished from their company a few weeks prior. The details were vague, but something in Fitz's description, particularly of the man's callous nature, resonated with Jasper. Jasper listened intently, his eyes narrowed. He pressed Fitz for more specifics, noting down every scrap of information. The trapper, oblivious to the true gravity of the situation, simply shrugged off the story as another of the wilderness's many harsh realities. But for Jasper, it was a lead, a fragile thread that, if followed, might just unravel the monstrous act committed against Lillian. The name of the camp, a place called Devil's Gulch, etched itself into Jasper's mind. He knew what he had to do. With the fragmented information from Old Man Fitz, Jasper knew he had to act. He explained to Elias his plan to investigate Devil's Gulch, emphasizing the dangers involved. Elias, though worried, understood. Lillian, though still frail, seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, her eyes following Jasper with a quiet intensity. Jasper prepared for the journey, packing supplies, checking his rifle one last time. He left Elias with clear instructions on how to care for Lillian and to stay hidden if anyone approached the cabin. The journey to Devil's Gulch was arduous, even for Jasper. The trail was rough, the terrain unforgiving. When he finally arrived, the camp was just as Fitz had described, a collection of ramshackle tents and crude shelters populated by a handful of hardened, desperate men. Jasper, armed with his rifle and an unwavering resolve, approached the central tent. His presence, stoic and determined, immediately drew attention. He confronted the man Fitz had described, a hulking figure with cold, calculating eyes. The man denied everything, his words laced with veiled threats. But Jasper, calm and unwavering, laid out the facts, the chilling details of a girl found chained in the snow. The man's bravado faltered, a flicker of guilt, or perhaps just fear, passing through his eyes. The tension in the air was palpable, but Jasper's quiet authority and the glint of his rifle left no room for doubt. Faced with Jasper's unyielding determination and the implicit threat of exposure in a land where justice was often swift and brutal, the man eventually confessed, admitting to his cruelty, driven by a twisted sense of control and the harshness of his own existence. He never gave a true reason beyond his own depravity. Jasper ensured the man was apprehended by the nearest authorities, a group of patrolling rangers from a distant outpost who happened to be passing through days later, alerted by Jasper's prearranged message with a trusted contact. Justice, in its own rough form, was served. Jasper returned to his cabin, the heavy burden of the past few weeks finally lifting. Lillian, though still bearing the scars of her ordeal, was slowly healing. With the threat gone, her fear began to truly recede. She still didn't speak much of her past, but her laughter, soft and tentative at first, began to fill the small cabin. Life in the Alaskan wilderness for Elias, Jasper, and Lillian found a new rhythm. The winter eventually gave way to spring, the snow melting to reveal a world bursting with life. Lillian became a quiet, cherished member of their makeshift family, her presence a constant reminder of the strength of the human spirit and the power of compassion. Elias, no longer just a boy struggling alone, had found purpose and a bond stronger than any hardship. The harsh beauty of Alaska, once a place of pure struggle, now held a new meaning, a testament to resilience, the enduring power of human connection, and the unwavering courage of a boy who ran all night to wake the only man who could help. This concludes the story of A Boy Saw Her Chained in the Snow. He ran all night to wake the only man who could help. No, we hope you were moved by this tale of courage and resilience. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe to the channel for more emotionally impactful stories, and don't forget to like this video.